first Sunday of the month, we do a special thing here at Fraser Coast Baptist Church, if you're just visiting. I provide a time where I answer any single question that anyone from the congregation, whether they've been here for 1 week or 100 weeks, I forget how many weeks I've been here without doing the math, but I call it Ask Me Anything. Ask Me Anything. What did you say, Pete? Quite a while, okay. The years are coming on, aren't they? Ask me anything. And the question I have this morning is, does 1 Timothy chapter 2 verse 12 teach that women cannot lead men? So you might notice that that's different to your bulletin. I'm trying to reframe the question in the simplest way possible. And so I'm not resolved with this. I don't have my heart set on this title, but the question can be framed many ways. Does 1 Timothy 2:12 teach that women can never teach a man? Does 1 Timothy 2:12 teach that women can never be pastors because men are in the congregation? Some scholars interpret this verse to say they can preach, but they can't be in authority over the church. And so, at the moment, I like this summary of the question, teach that women cannot lead men, because that's what we're talking about when interpreting this verse. So the reason I asked you to get your camera out is you have an option to ask questions while I go. And it's pretty much as simple as facing your phone to the QR code and clicking on the link that comes up, and automatically it takes you to a site called slido.com. If your camera doesn't work like that, you can type in a code. So you go to that website and you type in a code and you come up to the same place that I just did on my phone. Oh yeah. If this provides an opportunity for you to ask questions as I go, but to do it anonymously. If you like to ask questions publicly, then hopefully there'll be an opportunity after the message where we can do a Q&A. We won't conclude the service with a song, as we usually do, just a Q&A and then a closing prayer. So there's a couple of options for you. This interests various people. If it's not interesting to you, then that's okay. Hear what I have to say, and by the end of it, if it doesn't make sense, well, feel free to email me and say, hey, Pastor Tim, what you said doesn't make sense. Can you please clarify? Or you can ask more questions after today's gone, even. In fact, this Slido, what we call it, expires on Wednesday. And so I actually check it on Wednesday, see if there's any other questions that come out of this. And guess what? There might be some other questions that come out of this Ask Me Anything, because there are other passages which I'm not exploring today because the subject is just too big. This is the verse in 1 Timothy 2:12. If you've never heard of it before, you might not have your Bible with you, but it says this: this is the Apostle Paul writing. Okay, so the guy who wrote half the New Testament, he has he was quite an authoritative figure. He's the apostle of Jesus Christ, the last apostle. He was a special apostle because he actually didn't first-hand witness the resurrection of Jesus, but he had a first-hand encounter with Jesus later on after he was miraculously saved on the road to Damascus. It says in 1 Timothy 2:12, I do not permit a woman. So he's writing to Timothy, who was a pastor of the church in Ephesus at that time. He's giving instructions to Timothy. The church has been set up for quite a while now. The church is in a bit of a disarray at the moment, not just through the culture that's going on, but through the church, because there's actually false teaching that's happening in the church. And Timothy, being a young fella, I think needed all the support that he could get. Paul writes, I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man. And then there's a little phrase, they are to be quiet. And the question is, why? And does this mean, can women lead in the church? And so at face value, when you read that, you would think, oh my goodness, what are we doing in the church today? Are women actually allowed to preach? Are they actually allowed to teach? Are they actually allowed to be pastors? The interesting thing is that we have scholars and teachers and preachers. One famous pastor, which I won't name, when asked, does this verse mean that can women lead in the church? They would say, absolutely and unequivocally not. Now, I was brought up. Most of my days as a pastor, but as a Christian, my first initial insight into this passage, looking at people who were teaching it, because of the pastors I was following at the time, I believe this myself. Only until I've done further study on it, I'm saying, well, actually, maybe not. I don't think it is absolutely and unequivocally not the case when reading 1 Timothy 2 verse 12. But you say, Tim, but it's right there in black and white. So let's just take a few moments just to explore why I don't think it's absolutely the case. It's not, as they say, an open and shut case with this verse, as I used to think it was. The first thing is Paul's terminology in saying, I do not permit or I do not allow. King James Version says that I have up on the board, I suffer not a woman. When Paul is giving any other instructions to not do this or not do that, he doesn't use this terminology. He just says, as a prerogative, as a, my English is gone, imperative sentence, the one that just abstain from all evil, abstain from fornication, do not lie. This term, used in the New Testament, is never used by Paul in a way that expresses a permanent setting, a permanent situation, a universal law. It's always used as a temporary means for that particular situation. So it actually does mean I permit, I'm allowing. And does Paul have the authority to do that? Yes. God is giving him the revelation in the moment, in the history of time, to say, hey, this is how God wants the church, the local church, to operate and to help Timothy there. Then we move on to the verbs that he uses to not allow or to not permit. So he continues to say, I do not permit a woman to do what? To teach or to have authority. And so we have two verbs here. The question is, are they separate or are they used together? They are two different kinds of verbs, of course. But what I mean by are they separate or are they together, where most scholars do agree that you can't separate them. It's one or the it's none or both. Paul's not talking about just teaching and not having authority, as some interpret this verse to mean. It's about teaching and exercising authority. If that's the case, then when you put these two actions or two verbs together, they have to either be negative, both be negative, or they have to both be positive. And so what I mean by that is when you talk about teaching, you can do it positively or you can do it negatively. When you talk about exercising authority, you can either do that negatively or you can do that positively. And if you're wondering, let's talk about an illustration right now. Let's say a classroom of students and teachers. You have a teacher that can positively teach the kids the right things, and at that moment of time, the teacher is positively exercising their authority in the class. So it's positive. So how can you negatively do those things? Well, let's just say, hypothetically, a student gets up and a student somehow, I won't say how, overpowers the teacher and says, hey, I'm in charge. They are dominating or overpowering the authority in a negative way. And let's just say that student doesn't like that 1 + 1 = 2. Let's teach that 1 + 1 = a window. Or even worse, 3. This was happening in the church. Think about a false teacher in a church. In a false teacher, what are they teaching? False doctrine. And when a false teacher is in the church, if the person in charge is teaching something that's contrary to you, do you think they would be content with that? No, because the audience would say, oh, but the people in charge of the church, they're teaching something that's opposite to you. And what would they say in response? Well, they don't know what they're talking about. I know what I'm talking about. I'm the one that God has given me direct revelation to. So you see the difference between negative and positive. In other words, we have to ask the question when Paul's writing this. Is Paul saying women cannot teach true doctrine and be in authority? Or is Paul saying women cannot teach false doctrine and overpower the existing authority? Now, I would be convinced that Paul was saying it in the positive. If this word, usurp authority, or exercise authority, or have authority, depending on what translation is in your Bible, was a positive thing. But here's the catch. And here's not what many teachers preach these days. First of all, every translation that I've read has 2 words for this expression, for this verb. It's either have authority, exercise authority, usurp authority, or something else. In the Greek, it's only 1 word. 1 word. If that words or any of those words, 2 words, let's just say there were 2 words, was something like exousia. This is a Greek word to mean authority. And there's a couple of others. But exousia is the most common one in the Greek language. For instance, Mark used it in his first chapter of his gospel, found in verse 22. He says, Jesus taught them as one having authority. It's right there. And they were full of wonder. Who was full of wonder? The people were full of wonder at his teaching, at Jesus' teaching, because he gave it as one having authority. Exousia. A positive thing. And not like the scribes. And there's many instances of exousia. Paul even writes it himself about his own authority. That's found in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 8. For though I should boast somewhat more of our authority, talking about the apostles' authority, exousia, which the Lord has given us for edification and not for your destruction, I should not be ashamed. So if Paul used that same word in this particular passage, I would be convinced that he does not want women to preach or to lead or to be an authoritative figure in the church. But he didn't. He used this word. What's that word? Do I have any Greek scholars in here? No, the word is authenteo. Or another derivative of the word is authenten. One's a noun, one's a verb. Authenteo is this Greek. And what translators have given themselves the liberty to do, as any translator has associated this word with authority. Because, in a sense, it does have an underlining meaning of overtaking an authoritative figure. Here's what makes it puzzling. Again, Paul could have used any other words to express this action of women in exercising authority, in having authority. But he didn't. He used this word, which can only be found, listen very carefully, this word authenteo can only be found 8 times in the whole of all the ancient Greek literature and manuscripts that have been found. So not just by Christians, but by everyday secular people. Only 8 times throughout all those years. Interesting, right? Why does Paul use this word that is so rare? What makes it even more of a problem is that this word is a hapax legomenon. Does anyone know what a hapax legomenon is? I think it actually comes from a Latin derivative. An hapax legomenon, I'm just saying it more and more times to make sure I pronounce it correctly, means that this word is only used once in all of the Bible, in all of the New Testament since it's Greek. There's a few of them where there's just one word. Because scholars, if they're trying to figure out what the author is saying, they want to find other uses of the word to figure out what the meaning of that word is. What is the author trying to say? So let's look at other uses of the word to see if we can fit in a plausible interpretation of the overall passage, right? It's called a word study. That's the problem. So it's not only just found once in the whole Bible, there's only 8 occurrences, one being in the Bible, of the word. And so you look at the other occurrences in the ancient Greek, and you find that it's always in the negative. It's always in the negative. In fact, the word is used in one occasion to mean murder. Someone's giving an account of murdering someone, or someone murdering, I'm sure, unless it was a self-confession. But that word authenteo is used to express the murder. That would bring a puzzling face, right? What's Paul trying to say? Out of all the translations, even though the word usurp is not commonly used today, I think this is the most plausible translation, the most accurate translation. He says, I permit not a woman, to teach or usurp authority over the man. In other words, don't allow the women to dominate or overpower the existing authority. Don't let them do it. They were doing it. Don't let them do it. Next question is then, we look at the reasons of why Paul doesn't allow this. He says, again, I do not permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man. She must be quiet. For Adam was formed first, then Eve, and Adam was not the one deceived. It was the woman who was deceived and became a sinner. I read that, I study it, and I'm told, see, this is not something that is a cultural problem in Ephesus. This is a universal command. And I actually agree, it is a universal command. Because Paul doesn't want this to happen to any church through any part of history. But I'll get into that specifics a bit more later on. But I was taught, for Adam was formed first, because of the order of creation, because man was formed first in creation, they have, or always will have, a higher authority over the woman. Not only that, Adam wasn't the one that sinned. It was Eve was the one deceived. She's a woman. So not only was man created first, but Eve was the reason we're living in a world that's cursed and fallen and full of all this disgusting and horrifying consequences of sin. It's Eve's fault. And therefore, I won't say any more. Because the interpretations of that go way out the window for some. So how do we get that? Well, we get that from Genesis chapter 3, verse 16. Adam and Eve had just sinned. Sin entered the world. Remember, the world was perfect until that time. As soon as Adam and Eve sinned, that's when, unfortunately, those bananas started getting rotten. No more fruit that lasted forever. Consequences to the sin. And for the rest of mankind, what were they? Well, I'm still so glad I'm a man because I don't have to face this consequence. God bless you, women. But God said to the woman, I will greatly multiply your pain in childbirth. Which makes me think right now, actually. He says multiply your pain. Does that mean they had no pain in... Would they have had no... Because she didn't have children yet. Would they have had no pain in the Garden of Eden? Because she's saying multiply the pain. Just some... I'm speaking outside. That's my ADHD, sorry. Your pain in childbirth. Okay, that's the first consequence. So you will bear children in pain. Yep. And then he says, your desire will be for your husband and he will rule over you. All right? Enforcement, reinforcement, that. Man has authority over the woman. But I've been thinking about this. And say, hey, something doesn't make sense. Something doesn't make sense with this. I don't know why I clicked one day, because I've been listening to this and believing it the whole time. But then I thought, hey, if because Adam was formed first, that he has authority, then why is this now a punishment for sin? Because this is something new. Right? God is giving a new consequence for your sin. But if it was already in place, why is it a new consequence? Why is it a new thing? And the best response I've heard is, Oh, God was just reminding them. He was reminding Eve that Adam was in charge. I thought, I do not read a reminder in here. I read that your desire will be, that he will rule from now on. I thought, interesting. You can't have both. You've got to have one or the other. Alternatively, could verses 13 and 15 not be reasons for women not teaching men and usurping authority? Rather, could they be illustration of what was happening? Or could they actually be examples, actual examples of the false teaching that was occurring in this place? What I mean by that, could it be that Paul was dispelling a false teaching that, oh, no, Adam was formed first, not Eve? Could the false teaching be that was trying to say, well, women, we're all that. We were actually born first, not man. Could it be that because women are all that, which was very prevalent in this culture when you look at the God that they worshipped, or they came out of worshipping even, could it be that the false teaching was, well, no, that Eve was deceived, not Adam? Maybe they were teaching. Could they have been teaching Adam was the one who actually ate the fruit, not Eve? The answer is we don't know. We don't know. No one knows what the false teaching was. Going back to that statement, can this be absolutely and unequivocally a universal statement, a universal command? Who gives us the knowledge that that's the case? We just don't know. There's too many unknown variables. That's happening. The same context is in 1 John. 1 John, John, the Apostle John, is dispelling false teachings. And those false teachings was that Jesus wasn't even a human. It's like ludicrous. Read 1 John. He says, we've touched him in the flesh. So false teaching can be as ludicrous as we want it to be. The problem is we just don't know. We can't be sure. And this is where my ignorance has played a part. I think when we're reading this passage, we can either be two things. We can be ignorant in the sense that we actually haven't heard all of what was happening in the scene. We haven't heard all the interpretations. We haven't heard all of the research that's gone on with this passage. Or we could be arrogant. Arrogant to the point where, yes, I'm aware of that, but nah, can't be true. And I'm going back to, well, my conscience is saying, we don't know. We don't know. So, when reading this, I'm not even touching verse 15, by the way, due to time. If I was a translator, if I'd taken the liberty to express my opinion of what I think, in my opinion, because it's just opinions, what Paul is saying. If I was to translate that verse today, I think this is what I would say. Do not allow these women, he's already talked about the women, by the way, in the previous verses. Do not allow these women to dominate you or anyone else with their false teaching. Tell them to be quiet. Do we want that to be a universal command in all the churches? Yeah. Now, in this situation, it's women. And all through 1 Timothy chapter 4, chapter 5, he references the women, Some are widows, but they're young widows. But this can relate to a man. Do not allow anyone to dominate you or anyone else with their false teaching. Tell them to be quiet. So yes, in Ephesus, it related specifically to women. But today, I think we can relate that to anyone who comes to the church and tries to teach something that's false. To me, it's a statement relating to either men or women, and it can be either or. And so that's my 2 cents. But if you want to know more, if you want to delve into this further, I've taken the liberty to provide 2 good resources, one on either side of the argument. So if this interests you, if you are interested in the side of recognizing that Paul is saying that women, I do not allow women to teach false doctrine or to overpower or dominate the church, then I suggest you read Terran Williams' How God Sees Women, the end of patriarchy. If you want to explore the other side, then I suggest you read Recovering Biblical Manhood and Womanhood, a response to evangelical feminism by John Piper and Wayne Grudem. And we actually do have this book on the right, The Biblical Manhood and Womanhood, in our library that's in the office.
Last thing before Peter plays is I'll just re-emphasise that I'm convinced that what are the implications for Forest Coast Baptist Church? You know, I don't think it should change anything. I don't think we're going to be having a woman pastor anytime soon. But let's just say a young lady comes through the church and says, hey, I feel called by God to preach. Back in the day, I would have said, go to another church because I don't feel like I can lead that. But now, I would probably be open to helping that person pursue her calling. It might mean we may or may not have a woman preacher one week in this place, which we've never had before. It shouldn't change anything. I'll give you plenty of heads up. In the sense that if you know you can't, if you're a man and you know you can't listen to a woman preacher ever, then you just don't have to rock up that week. It's just 1 week of absence. We would forgive you and we'll just live our lives as normal the following week. And so I don't think there's many implications where we can, it causes someone to leave just because they disagree on this doctrine. Sadly, I think we've had at least one family leave because there's hints of this going on through this 2024. But I think we can have complete unity and agree to disagree on this passage. But thank you for your time, thank you for your courtesy, and thank you for your questions for those brave enough to go in public. God bless you. Have a great week.